With you on the line with us, our old buddy, Professor Richard Wolff, the economist, co-founder of Democracy at Work, author most recently of Capitalism's Crisis Deepens, Essays on the Global Economic Meltdown. The website, democracyatwork.info or rdwolff with 2fs.com. You can tweet him at Prof. Wolff, Profwolff. Dr. Wolff, welcome back.
Thank you, Tom. Glad to be here.
So I caught this article in the Washington Post, Economic Growth is Slowing All Around the World, by David Lynch. And, two broad questions about this. The first, what actually is happening with our economy and the world economy right now? And the second, why does capitalism have these cycles? I was reading an article some weeks ago about Australia and how in the last 30 years Australia has not had a significant recession because the government has set aside hundreds of billions of tax dollars during good times, and when the economy slows down, they do the Australian version of the German Kurzarbeit that you remember from 2009, where they paid factory workers not to work so that they still had a paycheck and they would continue to stimulate the economy or keep the economy rolling. And it seems like these are kind of stabilizing systems for capitalism, but are they solving the problem? And for that matter, by our Fed constantly going through these yo-yos of jacking interest rates up to 5 or 6%, and then a recession happens and dropping it down to zero, and Europe still has negative interest rates. Are we creating our own cycles, or exacerbating them, or making them worse, or is this all just trying to fix what's actually broken that's intrinsic to capitalism itself? Sorry for a whole word salad there, but I think you get...
No. Those are the big questions, and of course they come out all intertwined with one another because that's really the way the world works. Let's go from the basic to the less basic. The most basic thing is that capitalism, over the 300 years roughly that we've had it as the dominant system in most of the world, wherever it settles, no matter what the continent or when the time, it produces cycles. It is a highly unstable system, and it always has been. The history shows us that every 4 to 7 years, on balance, we have something that we can call a downturn, a recession. If it lasts a long time and cuts steeply, then we graduate the term to call it a depression. The big, horrible one in the 1930s, the second worst one, the one since 2008 that we're still in. The system has tried in every way for its entire history to get this instability under control. And to be blunt, it has failed. It has not been able to do it. After the really horrible one in the 1930s, we had a whole new economics, Keynesian economics, named after the British economist, that developed a whole strategy for what the government should do and could do. And by the way, that is what the Australian government that you mentioned has been doing, saving up money in the good times to be able to unload it, to try to stabilize the economy in its downturns. But nothing has worked. After the 1930s, we were told that modern regulations and all the rest would make sure this never happened again, and here we are many years later, and it has happened again. So yes, capitalism is a highly unstable system. Everything we have tried to prevent these recurring cycles has failed, and therefore all of us live in a system that confronts us repeatedly across our lifetimes with downturns that can either throw us out of work or do that to a member of our family or decimate our community's tax base, et cetera, et cetera. We all know what that's been about.
Has this been, if I may interrupt, has this been exacerbated by the interconnectedness? This whole neoliberal free trade, let's all kumbaya, the whole world thing, and so now, rather than having individual countries go into recessions or depressions, we have the entire planet doing this. I mean, is this like
yes? There's a whole body. This is an
active like a Kondraki wave.
It's an active debate in economics where people have felt, as you're suggesting, that at least in the past, when capitalism had a downturn in Europe, or say even in Britain. It might not happen the same time in Italy, so that in a sense one country could offset the downturn in another. But the more you globalize, the more you interpenetrate one economy with another, as companies in one invest in the other, and we trade with each other more and more, which has been the story for the last century. Yes, you get what's called coincidental business cycles, and instead of them offsetting one another, each of them makes the other one worse. For example, Europe is having a very hard time, and that negatively affects the United States. China has been slowing down over the last several years, and that definitely affects the economies of many of the third world countries that were shipping their mining and raw materials to China because it has such a rapid economic growth. So yes, the globalization takes away a balancing that you can find existed before. What that, of course, means is if you have a unified global capitalism subject to terrifying economic downturns, what you need is more coordination to deal with it. Instead, what we're getting now is Trump's nationalism. You could see in this morning's headline, as the Japanese decide to resume whaling because they're not going to be held back by international agreements now that the United States has withdrawn from the Paris climate agreements, et cetera, everybody going their own way politically on top of a coordinated global economy is really a recipe for very, very dangerous things. And the economies around the world are slowing. That's part of why the stock market in the United States is so crazy these days. And again today, by the way, because the anxiety that this could spin out of control with a fresh memory of how bad it was back in 2008 would make any reasonable investor extremely skittish and wondering what new shock of what new presidential tweet or global hotspot is going to, spook this entire situation and give us yet another downturn before we've really emerged from the last one.
So is part of the solution for the countries of the world to, as Germany and Australia have done, basically repudiate neoliberalism and embrace Keynesianism, or I realize you're generally calling for a much more radical change, challenging capitalism itself. How realistic is that? I mean, what are the steps that we can be pursuing?
Up until recently, I think the consensus among the leaderships of most major capitalist countries, Europe, Japan, the United States, and more or less the state capitalisms in India, China, and so on, they were focused on trying to do just what you said, a kind of coordinated, global, Keynesian interventionism with some disagreements about the exact timing and the exact size. But that coordination approach relies on everybody thinking that they can do better as part of a team effort than they can on their own. And Mr. Trump and the Republicans, probably for domestic political reasons more than anything else, have decided to blow all that up. And if you're the biggest player in a coordinated team and you decide to go your own way, you're basically signaling to the others that an attempt to survive on a coordination basis is doomed because the biggest player on your team isn't having any of it. And you can see that even inside these other countries, there's more and more of this go it yourself. The British want to leave Europe, and on and on. The Italians now basically doing it. The French beginning to toy with it because their effort to be a team player has landed Mr. Macron in ever greater difficulty. So I think you're seeing, in a way, the worst possible dysfunction of global capitalism. It needs coordination, but it doesn't believe in it. It's going to go on its own. That isn't going to work at all in a globalized economy, and you're just looking for scapegoats, which is why you have this bizarre focus on immigrants as if they were the problem when they are the least of the difficulties. It is a sign of a system in a very extreme moment of dysfunction, and it's not clear whether and how it can get out of it. I wish I didn't have to say such things, in the holiday season, but
no,
anything
I get
else
it.
would be make-believe.
I get it. We have 2 minutes until we hit a hard break here. Is the USS Titanic here, have we hit the iceberg and it's inevitable at this point, or are we still looking for the iceberg on the horizon and trying to avoid it?
I don't believe in inevitability. I never did. So, I don't think it's inevitable. But I think we are in a very, very dangerous place with a captain of the ship who's facing in the wrong direction and therefore unlikely to figure out how to get us out of it. And what will then save us, that's anybody's guess.
So by looking in the wrong direction, you mean as in, he's looking to solutions from the past that sometimes work and sometimes...
He's looking for scapegoats, immigrants, foreigners, trading partners, anything other than the system itself being broken. He can't face that, and he certainly can't face any culpability for himself. So we are caught up in a person finding scapegoats instead of finding solutions, and at a time of great difficulty, that's a luxury no society can afford.
So it seems like a rational starting point, anyway, would be to abandon Reaganomics and go back to Keynesian economics at certain level here in the United States. But what's the first step that would be toward a much larger solution in the 30 seconds we have left?
For me, it would be recognizing that this economy is above all a private capitalist economy, proudly so on the part of all the conservatives. That means that the basic contours of the economy come out of the decisions made by the enterprises that produce goods and services. A tiny minority, major shareholders and boards of directors, make those decisions and do it for the private profit of their companies. That produces social dysfunction. We need to democratize the enterprise, make them run by the customers and workers who make them go. That's the majority. That's the only way out I can see.
The workers' co-ops, basically.
That's it.
Worker-owned co-ops. Brilliant. Professor Richard Wolff, democracyatwork.info, rdwolff.com, Prof. Wolff, the Twitter handle. Professor Wolff, thank you so much.
Thank you, Tom, and have a Happy New Year.
Thank you. Happy New Year to you too, sir. And we'll talk to you next week.